All right, I'd like to welcome everybody to Gettysburg National Military Park. My name is Matt. So we're out here on Little Round Top, and we're so glad that you came out to join us for the Little Round Top tour. Now look, people, this is what Gettysburg is all about. I'm not saying about me, but I'm saying about this vista which you have right out here, and the landscape and the weather which we're having. So we're standing here in front of Little Round Top on the crest of it. North is behind the camera, or most of you to your right. The west is obviously behind me. East is behind the crowd right over here. The open area is to the west. When you come out here to Gettysburg National Military Park, whether you're a Civil War buff or not, most people will make a trek here to Little Round Top for a number of reasons. Like I alluded to earlier, it's absolutely a fantastic view from up here on this hill, overlooking the entire battlefield. I can't tell you how many people I've seen down here at sunset, you know, watching the sunset or pondering, you know, the military movements or doing whatever out here, taking pictures. It is just a beautiful place. 151 years ago, on July 2nd of 1863, this was a hot place, both literally and figuratively. This place was a hill of death, and it was not known by most soldiers as Little Round Top. It didn't have a name as far as I know. It was referred to in the reports as that little mountain by the Confederates, or that stony hill by the Federals. But by the end of the battle, by the time that the history books are written, it becomes known as Little Round Top. Now, how do we get to Little Round Top? How does it become significant? If you think about it right out here, ladies and gentlemen, Little Round Top goes through several transformations, and it's going through a transformation today. Historically, the first hero of the Battle of Gettysburg is actually right over here. This gentleman right here. I didn't mean you. I meant him. Okay? Sort of funny, a little bit funny. All right. This is Gouverneur K. Warren. And reportedly, if we've got it correct, if they marked it correctly, this is the very rock in which he stood upon, in which this visitor right here is on the periphery of breaking this rule by having his foot on this rock. All right, but he's halfway there. Gouverneur K. Warren is from New York. He is an up-and-coming star in the Union Army. He is the chief engineer of the entire Army of the Potomac. The chief engineer, what does that mean? He serves on the big general staff, and he goes out and he looks at terrain. He will position troops. He has a lot of latitude within the Union Army. Now Warren, why is he standing upon this rock? On July 2nd, he climbs up this hill basically by himself to find two or three soldiers from the Union Army from the Signal Corps, wig-wagging back and forth messages. What he doesn't find is anybody else, and that's a big deal to Warren, because at that time that Warren comes up here, the Confederates are starting their attack from this distant wood line over there. That is Seminary Ridge and Warfield Ridge off in this distance right here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it depends on what era you're from as far as what Warren's reaction is going to be with seeing this hill unoccupied. If you come from perhaps the World War II or Korea generation, you would perhaps have the reaction that this is not a good event to happen. If you were a product of the 60s, possibly a baby boomer and so forth, you would probably say, far out, heavy. If you're part of the newest generation, such as this young man back here, you will probably just stare into space. Because you will have no reaction. And if you're from the modern generation, you're not even listening to what I'm saying anyway, because you're currently texting. With that in mind though, ladies and gentlemen, basically in a nutshell, Little Round Top by default is going to become the centerpiece of the battle on July 2nd. It is a place that the Confederates want to hold, and it's a place that the Union forces want to hold. And it becomes in a nutshell a race against time to see which one can get here first. When you get into a battle, you have to get a lot of breaks in order to win it. Union Army's good, Confederate Army's good. They're two good teams coming upon the field. They get a big break when Gouverneur K. Warren climbs up here and on top of this rock. Going back to what I said earlier of how the history of the hill can change. How many of you have seen the the movie Gettysburg? Right? The vast majority of you have seen the movie Gettysburg. Who's the hero in the movie Gettysburg? Chamberlain, Joshua Chamberlain. We're going to touch on Chamberlain later, okay? And Chamberlain's a big part of this battle. I'm not diminishing that. But to show you how history changes, you will notice that Chamberlain does not have a bronze statue. Warren does. In the 1800s, in the 19th century, folks, Gouverneur K. Warren is the hero of Little Round Top, not Joshua Chamberlain. And that's how much that meant to the United States, to the people, to erect this statue right out here. Now, why is the hill unoccupied? Let's back up a little bit. Now, the great thing about being on Little Round Top is you look out across this field and you can see for a long distance. The beautiful thing about preserving this battlefield, ladies and gentlemen, is you get to come up here in 2014 and you get to make the same decisions that they did 151 years ago because the terrain is pristine. Now, this is the situation up here. Armies are comprised of corps, all right? There are 7 Union Army Corps. 6 of those Union Army Corps are under command of West Point graduates. The 7th Corps, which is designated the 3rd Corps, is under the command of a guy by the name of Dan Sickles. Uncle Dan, all right? Uncle Dan is somebody that is controversial, to say the least. He is most well known before the war for having shot his wife's lover across the street from the White House at Lafayette Square, and then his subsequent acquittal on the grounds of temporary insanity. The first time in American jurisprudence history that that defense has been used. Gets away with it scot clean. What you need to know about Dan Sickles is that he can make a decision. Whether you agree with the decision is up to you. But know it for a fact that Dan Sickles will make a decision. Dan Sickles and his 3rd Corps of about 10,000 men are positioned between Little Round Top off to the north. I'm pointing off to the north, to your right. He is positioned between here and that Pennsylvania Memorial. And he is supposed to extend his line down to the left. Now, when you get into Gettysburg and you get into controversies out here, here's where you get in the Battle of Gettysburg. Was Sickles ordered to occupy the hill? You can have scholars that argue he was, you can have scholars that argue he wasn't. Regardless, you don't have to be a military scholar to figure out that this hill is pretty important. But there's a caveat. Sickles is looking at this terrain up here where you see those distant red barns. And this is the thing about preserving this park, ladies and gentlemen, because you can go down there and you can see the same thing Sickles did. He perceives that the ground in front of him is a better place to occupy than the one he has ordered. And in Sickles' defense, he tries to get clarification from headquarters. The big man, George Meade, and he can't get any clarification. And the clock ticks on throughout the morning of July 2nd. And Sickles becomes more antsy about the Confederates coming up there and occupying that high ground. And so, around noon, Sickles makes a decision. For better or worse, he decides that his orders allow him to advance that corps directly out in front along the Emmitsburg Road. Now, once again, getting into the Battle of Gettysburg, The great thing about the Battle of Gettysburg is you can come here for the next 5 days, take a little round top tour, and you will get a different tour every time, because everybody's got a different view. The problem with me telling you, and this is going to be my opinion, the problem with me telling you anything about Dan Sickles is that Dan Sickles never admits any guilt about his move out here. It was always the right move. And Sickles, by trade, is not a soldier. He is a politician and somebody that can obfuscate facts. Very good. A lawyer. There you go. All right. Obfuscate. I had a hard time getting that one out, but it worked out for me right there. That's one of them 4-syllable words right there. So Sickles is going to move his corps out in front. What I assume that he thought, or his perceptions were, is that on the other side of those red barns and those woods right here, behind them, he sends out a reconnaissance and they bump into Confederates. There are actually Union monuments over by the modern-day Park Amphitheater. There's 2 of them. You can go over there and see them today. Those monuments are there because of that reconnaissance. And they bump into the Confederates where the monuments are. You know, they had to fight around the monuments and they get nicked up and everything, but that's all right. At least somebody thought it was funny. So, based on that, and this is my theory, based on that, I think that Sickles feels that his time is up. So what does he do? He decides that the Confederates are over there, and he marches his corps out and positions them along the Gettysburg Road where those red barns are. The apex, he'll be in an inverted V. The apex of his line is at the peach orchard. The peach orchard is located, it's kind of hard to see, but if you see these woods directly in front of me, if you can see through that small little gap, you can barely see some bushes right over the edge of this tree line. Doesn't really matter, but that's where the peach orchard is. That's where Sickles' line, I'm the apex, is going to bend back around. His right flank along the red barns, his left flank coming this way and resting right down there in a place called Devil's Den.
How many men would that be approximately, his corps?
His corps, a little under 10,000. Say about 9 maybe or something. We get into aggregate and we get into present and we get into, you know, shirkers and what did he really have and so forth. Devil's Den. Worst ground I ever saw for fighting. What is the point though? His line ends there. And this is the neat thing once again about preserving the battlefield. He moves his corps out there. He doesn't have enough men. He doesn't have enough men to cover his front. So what ends up happening? Gaps. He does not connect his right flank with the rest of the Union Army, and his left flank fails to occupy the key of this area, which is Little Round Top. This is not a trick quiz, okay? So what are you going to do? George Meade, the Union Army commander, has to react to Dan Sickles. And whether you agree with Dan Sickles or not, this is the ultimate repercussion from Sickles' move out there. When Sickles throws that corps out in front of the rest of the Union Army, by the time the Army commander, George Meade, finds out about it and gets over here and he comes riding up, Sickles' headquarters is over here at the Trossel farm. I would love to have been a fly on the wall when George Meade caught up with Dan Sickles. Right over that tree line, you can barely see that white side of that barn right there. That's Sickles' headquarters. Meade was a professional military officer, and I'm sure he expressed his opinion freely with Dan Sickles that day. Sickles offers to withdraw his corps, but at that time, we'll come back to this, the Confederates are beginning to start his attack. So what are the repercussions? The repercussions are that the whole Union Army is going to have to support Sickles. That is beyond doubt. Sickles' move becomes a gigantic vacuum cleaner, which sucks in all these Union units into this fight. So in a nutshell, what you have here, ladies and gentlemen, is waves of fresh Union reinforcements coming in here and hitting the Confederates, and waves of fresh Confederates coming in here and hitting the Federals, and what you end up with is a seesaw battle right out here in front of Little Round Top. That's the wheat field in a nutshell, and that's why it changes hands so many times, because of momentum and fresh troops. But that's all because of Sickles' moves.
Where's the wheat field from here?
The wheat field is right behind this tree line directly in front. We can't really see it, but it's right behind there.
Were those trees there?
The trees were there. That's a very good question, sir. I can tell you, this is the strengths and limitations. I can tell you that those woods in front of me, the rose woods, were there. I can tell you that the perimeter of the woods today is about like it was in 1863. What I can't tell you, and what the maps limit me with, is the denseness. And the one thing that we've lost in 151 years, a big thing as far as views, is we don't have any more animals. Back 151 years ago, they had cows in there. And what do cows do to the underbrush? They chew it, they knock it down. So you could see deeper into those woods than you can today. But once again, I don't know. You know, I can't tell you this tree was here, that tree was there. Just the perimeter. Very good question.
Need some cows.
I need some cow. How about some goats? Chickens? Pot-bellied pig? No?
Boar.
Wild boar? That'd be nice. I'd give them a spook down there at Devil's Den. There you go. All right, so Sickles has moved out front. Now, before I move to the Confederate side, are there any questions? I'm doing better than I thought. That is the reason that Warren is going to ride up here. We'll come back to Warren in just a minute. Sickles has failed to occupy it. All right, Confederates. Robert E. Lee is sitting back at his headquarters at the northern end of Seminary Ridge. If you look off in the distance, above that barn with the three white little, I don't know what you call it, white cupolas right there. If you look above it, you will see a church steeple. Good call there, buddy. You will see a church steeple along those woods. That's roughly where, that's the seminary, that is roughly where Lee's headquarters is.
That barn that you talked about, is that the Canary?
That is the Cadore barn. Now, Lee wants to attack the Union Army over here. So how does he get at it? He sends out a reconnaissance at dawn on July 2nd under a guy by the name of Captain Johnson. Samuel Johnson. You want him to get into controversial Gettysburg actions? Captain Johnson is one of those things that'll never be solved. Johnson will state that he got to Little Round Top and that he saw that the hill was unoccupied. And people have debated that ever since. We don't know exactly where he got, but it's not really important. What is important, ladies and gentlemen, is what he tells Robert E. Lee. And what he tells Lee is that the Union Army, their left flank, my left right here, their left flank is in the air, meaning it is not anchored. It can be turned, cross the T on it, right here. And based on that intelligence, which is derived at dawn, probably around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, Lee bases his attack plan for July 2nd. Now remember what time I told you. Early dawn. Lee therefore turns to his subordinate, his corps commander, a guy by the name of James Longstreet, and he says, I want you to go over here and attack this Union line. Longstreet protests, according to Longstreet, and says, you know, we were going to fight a defensive battle, you shouldn't be doing this. Lee and him have a meeting, and Lee decides to attack anyway. Longstreet argues, remember, corps are comprised of divisions, divisions are comprised of brigades, and brigades are comprised of regiments. Longstreet argues that he should be able to await one brigade of Alabamians to come in from Guilford Courthouse in Pennsylvania, and then he will start his attack. And for better or worse, Lee, for all we know, seems to acquiesce to this. But what it ends up doing is costing time Whole theme of this thing is time. Okay, you ain't got it. Now, Lee wants this attack to start as early as possible. That's with probably any attack, except maybe modern day, because what do you have to have in order to fight? Light. You have to have light. The darkness is your enemy, especially if you're an attacker and trying to move and trying to coordinate right here. So what ends up happening, ladies and gentlemen, is that Longstreet, that brigade of Alabamians, does not reach here until around 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And Longstreet does not start his countermarch, which will be another 5 miles, until around noon. It takes time. You're talking about moving on a road that's about like a one-lane country road with hundreds of wagons, dozens of artillery pieces, and thousands of men. And guess what? They haven't reconnoitered the place. You stand right there. If he is a hill, this gentleman right here, they get to a hill behind Seminary Ridge. And they come up to the hill and they realize that if this gentleman is Little Round Top, that they can see the hill from Little Round Top. So Longstreet is in a pickle because he's on this one-lane road and he can't go over the top of the hill. So it looks like the thing to do would be to just about face, everybody turn around, and you make the tail the head, and you march this way. Reverse it. What Longstreet ends up doing is keeping the head, and he turns that entire column like a snake. He turns that entire column around on that one-lane road. Do you know how long that had to take to get that thing turned around? Time is ticking, is ticking, is ticking. And so what I'm telling you is it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon by the time that Longstreet pulls up along this wood line. What time did Lee formulate that plan? Early dawn. Now it's, 10 hours later. And what has changed dramatically for the Confederates since that plan was formulated in this area? Lots of Union troops. Who's moved out here? Uncle Dan. All right, Uncle Dan. So let's go back to the beginning of the talk. When George Meade hears something is amiss on his Union left flank over here, he rides out to the Trossel farm. And on his way there, he turns to his chief engineer, Gouverneur K. Warren. He says, "Warren, I hear a little peppering over there on yonder hill. Why don't you ride over there and see what's going on?" And Warren rides up here to find Sickles' line ending down there in the Devil's Den. And he has a hunch. The Confederates are already firing directly behind me at that observation tower. There probably already artillery going off. But he has a hunch that the rebels are extending way over here in that wood line. So he sends a message down to those Union guns in the Devil's Den. And he has those guns pivot, and they fire a few shells into that wood line. What happens when they fire the shells into the wood line?
More comes back the other way.
Yep. What do people do in the wood line when the shells come in?
Start to move around.
They move, they duck. And what does the sunlight do on their barrels? It glitters. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Gouverneur K. Warren is standing like he is today, looking where he is today. Because this is the rock, supposedly, and that is the spot, beyond doubt, where he first saw that the Confederate line extended to. Now, what's the big deal?
You're going to flank the devil.
That's right. Exactly. So if he's the Confederates, congratulations, you got a promotion. If he's the Confederates and I'm Sickles, why is this a bad place to be?
Your guns are facing the other direction.
That's right. Where's the enemy?
On your flank.
That's right. He is somewhat on the side of me and behind me. Uh-oh. That's what you call, in layman's terms, the pucker factor. And so what does Warren do? He sends a courier down to the valley to get reinforcements. He first goes to Sickles. Sickles says, I ain't got anything, I'm too thin. Well, he doesn't say that, but he says, I got nothing. All right, but he is too thin. So Warren, his aide, goes on to another commander, this time to Sykes, who happens to be standing there. General George Sykes is the commander of the 5th Corps. And Sykes says, okay, I've got control of my entire corps here. I'll just detach a brigade. This is how you get lucky. That aide, when you have, once again, corps, division, brigade, regiment, brigade, division, corps, how that's supposed to work is Sykes sends a message to the division commander, in this instance Barnes. Barnes picks out a brigade commander. The brigade commander has to find 4 colonels. The 4 colonels have to find 10 captains, and the 10 captains have to find the sergeants. 20 sergeants apiece. And they get the privates motivated. There is a lag time. That courier goes galloping off from General Sykes with orders to detach a brigade. He comes across, as that courier is galloping along, he comes across a brigade commander. Corps, division, brigade. We're skipping a step here. He comes across a brigade commander named Strong Vincent, 26 years old. He stops him. He says, what are your orders? The guy, you can imagine the lather on the guy, the courier's horse and everything. He goes, what are your orders? And the guy says, I have an order. I need to find General Barnes. Vincent insists that the courier give him his orders, and the orderly says, Sykes wishes for a brigade to be sent to that hill. And this is where you get lucky. Vincent takes the initiative to march his brigade here, to cut through the Army red tape and to start his troops on this march here. One second. On the march here. So in a nutshell, what is everything that I've told you so far? Strong Vincent and his 4 regiments are marching this way. The Confederates are stepping off over here in the distance behind me. And it becomes a race against time to get here to Little Round Top. And I don't think I'm giving away too many endings when I tell you that the Union Army is going to win the race. But I probably will surprise you by saying they probably only won the race by maybe 10-15 minutes. It was that close. And hypothetically, if Vincent hadn't taken the initiative, could have been a different thing. But that's the breaks you get in a battle. You got to get in a battle. Yes, sir.
How long would it have taken to go through red tape?
How long would it have taken? Well, I can't answer how long it would, the drag time, the delay time would have been, because it would depend on how much further the courier would have to go, and then the division commander would have to come back and find, if it was Vincent, he'd have to come back and find Vincent, and then, so there would be, it depends on the distance.
How long do you think? Do you have an idea?
I would say that in order to get, if everything was concise, in order to get something moving, if everything was readily available, from start to finish, you were probably looking at maybe 20 to 30 minutes.
So they wouldn't have made it?
Well, welcome to Gettysburg.
Did he get a promotion?
It's better that they started when they did. How about that?
Did Vincent get a promotion for saving the day?
Some of you need to quit giving away the story. Vincent did not receive a promotion that day.
You're spoiling the story there.
No more soup for you. Any other questions? None?
The situation with Longstreet, when you're saying he's counter-marching over there.
Yes.
I did read something where McLaws was protesting the fact that he would have to be turned around and Hood's division would be in the lead, and that's why they took the time for McLaws to do the swing around. Longstreet gave in to his request to be in the head of the column.
There is a point, yes. What he's basically saying is that, what did I say? Corps, division, brigades. There are 2 divisions in Longstreet's corps. That's going to be McLaws and Hood's. And McLaws was leading the march. And so what is the problem, what is the benefit of being on the front end of a march and the problem with being on the tail end of a march? Well, the snake effect, but what are you eating?
Dust.
Dust. That's why you want to be first. So McLaws, it was, I don't know if they swapped it off or it was always by seniority, but it is argued that McLaws was supposed to be first that day. I would think the circumstances of the moment would dictate that you just did the most expedient thing. But I don't really, that's not really the big picture to me. The thing about Longstreet's countermarch is he should have known about that darn hill. Here's the hill right over here, still standing here like a hill. That the one thing, he should have reconnoitered it. You're going to be taking 15, 18,000 men on this counter march and you don't know what way you're going to take them? That's the little thing. That should have been dealt with. He's too big a general not to have known that.
Can I add?
Yes.
Didn't the artillery, that's over by Black Horse Tavern.
Yes.
That hill. Didn't the artillery already go over that hill? So they were already...
The artillery went around it. But the big debate was, if he's the hill right here, and I'm coming up to the hill, all right, you might not go over it, but instead of going over it, why don't you just go around it, which is what the artillery did.
I thought maybe the artillery was already sighted anyway, so why not just...
Alexander, the artillery commander, never understood why the infantry didn't follow. But that's the little things that, you know, that's the little things that get you. Stuff happens. There you go. Aren't you nice? It's a fairly good group, I would say. Yes? No? Any others? Okay, one other thing before we get to, well, my blue-clad friend. Yeah, I remember you. Come up here. Stand up here with me. And don't shoot me. This is the closest I've been to a Yankee in months. All right, so the Confederates are coming up here, and they're starting to get into this area. You're going to be a Confederate, okay? For a moment. We don't have to cry about it.
Everybody has a cross to bear.
Okay. I don't know what to say, and that's a rare thing. Okay, let's say that I represent one division, Corps, Division, Brigade, Regiment. He represents the other division. We're the two divisions from Longstreet's Corps that is coming up here. He's Hood's division, I'm McLaws' division. All right, so with these two divisions sitting right here, the original plan was for me to come up and attack first, and then Hood to join in behind me. All right, so what they were going to do to orient, I know everybody can see, but the Pennsylvania Memorial's off here, or to the camera's right here. What we're going to do, walk out with me. We're going to walk out and we're going to swing this way. And what are we going to do? We're going to hit the Union line at right angles. When we get up here, stand back where you were. When we get up here, ladies and gentlemen, we find Dan Sickles in front of us, and McLaws, like you said, sir, is very hot about the attack and so forth. Longstreet is not physically, personally on the field. He's in the back, which is not a big deal, but he hasn't made it to the front yet. McLaws is saying, hey, boss, I got all these Federals in front of me. I can't do what my orders are. I can't perform my orders. I can't execute them. Longstreet says attack. Longstreet's in a foul mood. He says attack. McLaws says I can't do it. Longstreet sends back word, attack. Now, Lee wants you to attack. McLaws gets ready to attack. Longstreet makes it to the front and he calls it off at the last minute. What ends up happening is they reverse. Instead of me going first, now he's going to go first. So Hood is going to step out to where you are, and I'm going to stand, stop right there, and I'm going to stand right here. So what is Hood doing? Here's the Union Army, stay right there. Here's Sickles, here's Hood, here's McLaws, here's, once again, Hood right there. Hood is going to end up being right hook. McLaws is going to be left jab. Hood is going to come in here and find the end of the Union line. What did I tell you earlier? The great thing about the battlefield and preserving it is you get to make the same decisions. Go over there to that observation tower and stand there. You can't see Devil's Den. So what does Longstreet have to do? He knows, excuse me, he knows the Union line is somewhere over here, but he doesn't know exactly where. So he sends out Hood to find it. Right hook. And that's what's going to be coming right at Little Round Top.
So the plan was never to actually attack Little Round Top itself. You say the original plan, they didn't know Sickles was out there.
The original plan was for the Confederates to anchor upon Emmitsburg Road, that highway out there, and to use that as a guide mark to advance against the Union flank, like a swinging door. But they had to alter the plan. So they break it up, instead of a swinging door, they break it up into 2 punches. Does that make sense? So it's 2 moving parts here.
So Sickles actually created confusion on the Confederates accidentally.
Sickles would argue after the war, exactly, Sickles would argue after the war that his move thwarted Robert E. Lee's attack plan. Sickles would argue in lawyer talk that he shielded Little Round Top by occupying Devil's Den. Okay?
But any experienced West Point officer would have known how important this was.
That's probably what got him in the end. What I think happened, and once again, Sickles never admits any guilt, sir. What I think happened is he got out there and he thought he could perform his original orders. He probably thought he had enough men to connect with the rest of the Union Army. Plus, remember, like I said earlier, when he moves out there, these Rebs aren't here. It's a whole lot better position when the Rebs are behind those 3 red barns, and it's a whole lot worse position when the Rebs are over here. So it's a moment in time as to when he makes the decision and what information he had at the end. But Sickles obfuscates that too, because he says he knew Longstreet was coming. So there you go. There's your Gettysburg conundrum. Good luck figuring it all out, all right? I doubt Sickles knew that Longstreet was coming. Okay, let's take a break. We're gonna cut the film at this point for our YouTube visitors right now, and we're gonna walk over to the southern end of Little Round Top, and we're gonna continue the action as we bring up Johnny Reb and Billy Yank and get down to the fighting on Little Round Top. Let's go. I just had a small stop right here that I wanted to go out and show you. If you want to come back through here, or you want to see it right now. This is Hazlitt's battery, which I'm getting a little bit out of order as far as the fighting. But these guns were manhandled up here after Strong Vincent. Men were in position. That's off to my left or directly to your front. The reason that I stopped here is because before there was monuments, before there were sidewalks up here, they actually came out and they started to mark this area by chiseling in the rocks. And Hazlitt is later going to go down, and one of the first markers on this battlefield is actually behind that little monument, etched behind there. Now, the Park Service didn't do this, but somebody came back in and painted in the letters, and you can see that right there in that area. That's how you start getting places marked out here on this field.
Some people call that graffiti. Several.
Graffiti is new markings.
What do they call it when the soldiers?
Old graffiti is now historic.
Several on the battlefield.
There's several rock carvings, but you can find stuff like that on the Gettysburg battlefield. There's also a gentleman named Weed who was hit. This is his picture right here. As you pan over here, Weed is going to get hit by one of the Confederates on this hill, and when he goes down, that Confederate knew, whoever shot him knew he'd gotten himself a big dog. And when he'd shot himself a big dog, what's going to happen then? Yeah, another big dog's going to come along. So he sat there. If this is the same soldier, which I bet it is, he waited until somebody came to help Weed, and that would be Hazlitt. And guess what he did? He dropped Hazlitt right on top of it. Does anybody know Weed's last words? I am as dead as Julius Caesar. What did you expect? All right, he was a Roman. Never mind. He had leaves in his hair. Bald dude. Okay. Kind of funny? No. All right, so yeah. So in the immortal words of former license guide Blake Chambers, Weed gets whacked. That's for you, Blake. All right, let's go right over here.
Where was the 16th?
16th, we're going down to it. Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony's about to begin. It'd be cool if you could call that one. All right? Okay. Now we're standing right on the, I guess you could say, the southern edge. The south's off to my right here, to your left as far as the crowd. Right down here below me is the monument to the 16th Michigan. And because we met at the Warren statue, we're going to go about the deployment of this line in backwards motion. Not that it really matters. But the 16th Michigan, we think, was the last regiment to come in line, brigade regiment. So what am I doing? I am moving down from the big picture, and we're moving down to small picture. Strom Vincent's brigade of 4 regiments, brigade regiments, is going to be coming up here on this hill and deploying facing south. A lot of people are surprised by that. They would have thought that Vincent would have been facing this way, toward the west. But the rebels are swinging in from behind the Union Army, so to speak. And so these Federals are actually facing this way. And this is the end of the Union line for this moment in time, the right flank, I should say, right there. Okay, so the Union men are in position. And coming out of that wood line down there is none other than the 4th and 5th Texas. 4th Alabama right over here. And you know Texans. Hard-headed people. And they like to fight. The Texans are some of the best soldiers in Robert E. Lee's army. And what are they going to do? They're going to take a look up this hill and they're going to think, my gosh, we're in for it now. But they're going to retreat back into that wood line, and they're going to reform their ranks, and they're going to come on with that rebel yell, that eerie rebel yell. Now, if you're thinking about Napoleonic tactics out here, where'd your pistol go? If you're thinking about Napoleonic tactics, and what do? They put men in 2 ranks, don't they? First rank, second rank out here. If you're thinking about Napoleonic tactics, do you think that that's going to work on this hill? No. So what are the soldiers going to have to do? They are going to have to become, every soldier is going to have to become a general. Every soldier is basically going to be on his own hook. Are the officers going to be out here trying to command them? Yeah. Are they going to be sending them up and down the hill? Yes. But their command and control of their units is very poor, because these soldiers are going to get hunkered down behind these rocks, these very boulders which we're surrounded by today. That's one of the cool things about Gettysburg, a little round top, is these rocks were right here in 1863. These Texans start moving from rock to rock and from bush to bush, and they start fighting these Federals. And the fighting grows to a crescendo. There are only roughly about 150, 180 Michiganders down here on the end of this ridge. Very small regiment. And their line, as I said, ends right there. Now, if he, face this way, sir. If he is the Michigan troops, and I am the Confederates right here, I'm going to hit him. And we're going to start fighting. And then what am I going to do? I'm going to start sliding to what? To here. Why do I want to be here? That's right, I outflank him. I cross the T on him. He can't shoot this way. And that's exactly what the Texans are going to do. They're going to, as Patton would say, they're going to hold them by the nose. Okay, so the Texans start moving up through here behind me, and the Michigan men, they start to fall back right here to where we're standing along this crest. The Union line is unraveling. At that moment, ladies and gentlemen, you couldn't have planned it any better to back up a little bit. Now Union reinforcements come up. Weed's Brigade, actually one regiment from Weed's Brigade, the 140th New York. And it is so close. These Texans are almost on the top of the hill. It is so close that the New Yorkers don't have time to deploy in the battle line. They literally charge as a mob, basically, down the hill and hit the Texans and push them back off the crest on this right flank and save it. They don't get the credit that the 20th Maine does. But once again, the Union line, the Union Army has gotten very lucky. Right at the last minute. You couldn't write a play better than that out here. Any questions?
So why don't they get the credit? Did people in Gettysburg that made the movie just decide Chamberlain was a more better figure?
It starts with why didn't they get the credit is the question. They do get the credit to a certain extent. Patty O'Rourke has a restaurant named after him. O'Rourke's statue over here has basically a gold nose. And why is that? That's for good luck. And good luck to you. And so they think since O'Rourke's luck, which he got killed around here, since O'Rourke's luck ran out, then you could rub his luck off on you. Right there. So, but no, the reason they don't get the credit is because starting with the author, Michael Shera, chose Chamberlain as one of his focus points. And what is the other thing? If you're going to be historical, you need a character that's going to live. And O'Rourke's not going to make it. But he saves this end of the Union line. Any other questions? What do you think? Your mother's so proud of you. I know, it's not cool, is it? Okay, what we're going to do then is I'm going to come back up, we're going to about face, and I'm going to take you down my secret path, and we're going to wind our way on down to the 20th Maine in our last stop. It's Matt. It's Matt. It's another lovely day here at Gettysburg. Question was the movie Gettysburg filmed here? The parts of it, a lot of the scenes were filmed behind that Longstreet's observation tower. Remember the tower I told you back over there? It's actually on private land back behind there. The thing that you couldn't realize, and I can't describe, is that Hollywood, when they set a scene like that, like if you turn the camera one way, it's Cemetery Ridge and Pickett's Charge. If you turn it the other way, it's Little Round Top. And it's all within like the same area, how they came out. Now they would come on the battlefield and get shots. For instance, yes, they filmed some of that on Little Round Top. If you've got, what do you call it, frame by frame on your DVD, if you look closely, some of the monuments you can see they've covered with camo net in the background. But they really blend in. They look like trees or something back there. So, you know, there's some scenes. But the physical, the hand-to-hand opposing lines was done off the part. But for instance, when Pickett's Charge walks out across the field, they shoot that scene, you know, when they're playing the grand music as the Confederates start across. And then they film the actual fighting at another location. Yeah. The scene with, I'm not really a movie expert, but the scene with Robert E. Lee, Martin Sheen, I used to, in the old visitor center, they played it continuously, you know, in the bookstore. So I couldn't see it physically, but I got to the point where I could tell what scene was on based on the music. And I would get to the point where I could walk in there at the exact moment that the men come out to cheer Robert E. Lee. you know, and they're like leaves like this, you know. Oh, I could just stand there and just like that. But where was I going with that? That scene was not planned. It actually, when Martin Sheen came out on the field, the reenactors rushed him, and the director said, "My gosh, we got to get this scene." So they filmed it. Pretty cool.
So they were caught up in the moment, kind of?
They were caught up in the moment, and they put it in the movie. It wasn't in the script.
You've seen some of the faces on them when they're raising their muskets. They're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. All right, we're now standing in the area of the 20th Maine, and we'll get around and focus on the monument in just a second. Now, what did I say at the beginning? We were talking about history and how layers of history come up and how our views of the battle and Sickles and Chamberlain and Warren and all these people change over time. This place is one of the best examples on the battlefield. Before the movie came out, this area, which is all cleared out around through here, it's not really any grass or shrubs, much of anything around through here. This area, before the movie came out, looked just like the rest of these woods. But when the movie, because nobody came back here, but when the movie came out, we started getting a lot more traffic. And now we have to catch up with the times, and we're undergoing a study about how to rehab, widen the trails, take trails away, where to put them, where not, you know, how to, the wear and tear on the hill. This is an area we have to catch up with. Now, historically speaking, 151 years ago, Strom Vincent would later be killed that day, but before he was killed, he brought Joshua Chamberlain over here, personally, leading the 20th Maine at the front of the column. And Vincent said to Chamberlain, "Hold this ground at all hazards." What does that mean?
All costs.
At all cost. What does that not allow you to do?
Retreat.
You have no option to retreat. Hold this ground at all options out here. So the 20th Maine, Chamberlain knows that he is do or die right here. Now, Joshua Chamberlain doesn't really need any introduction. Joshua Chamberlain is a well-read man, to put it that way, before the war. He is a professor of philosophy and rhetoric at Bowdoin College in Maine. My first tour out here on Little Round Top, it'll never happen to me again. I had an alumnus from Bowdoin College, and I, in my true Southern accent, said Bowdoin, because, you know, Bowdoin.
Tommy Bowden.
Bobby out here, and not spelled exactly the same way, but anyway, I said Bowden. I thought this person was going to kill over right there on the ground for him. Very hazardous, you understand. So it's Bowdoin College. Well, he's a professor. He has no prior military experience, but what can he do? He can read, and obviously he's not a dunce out here. So he rises up through the ranks because he is a well-educated man. And you know what? The one thing that the intangible about Chamberlain, which you can never put on paper, is Chamberlain's a natural leader. People like Chamberlain. Chamberlain leads from the front. And he's got that right touch with his men. He is a scene, ladies and gentlemen, a person that we will never see again in the scenes of American history. Why? Because you just never see somebody come out of the civilian ranks, a professor for that matter, come out of the ranks and rise up to be a major general. This won't happen. Well, I don't foresee it. So Chamberlain is ordered to hold this line. He's got about 300 men along through here. Coming through this woods, and there's fighting already occurring over here with the Texans and the 16th Michigan and the 44th New York, etc. Coming through these woods is those Alabamians. Remember, I told you earlier that Longstreet argued to wait on one last brigade of Alabamians. This is the same men. And these Alabamians, comprising the 15th, primarily what we're looking at today, under the command of William C. Oates, have just climbed Big Round Top, come over the summit, and are now descending into the saddle between Little Round Top and Big Round Top. right out here. They have already undergone a march of roughly 20 miles to get here. And then they did another 5-mile counter march to get into position to attack. And to top it all off, they were out of water. So they sent the canteen runners off when they were beginning the attack, and the canteen runners didn't come back by the time they set off their attack. So they go into this attack with no water.
In July.
In July, wearing
Thick cotton.
yep, thick cotton, thick wool cotton uniforms. Think you got it bad. And brogans, their shoes. So anyway, William C. Oates is the exact opposite of Chamberlain, Joshua Chamberlain. Totally different background. Oates grows up in Pike County, Alabama, which is sparsely populated. His father is a tavern owner. Chamberlain runs away from home after his father thrashes him at age 16. He runs away for several months. He comes back, he settles down. I guess him and his father made amends. He comes back, he settles down, he becomes a school teacher. Must have been a well-read guy, despite being in the country. He becomes a school teacher, and then at his father's tavern one night, he gets into a fight with a man, and he beats him up so bad with a wooden mallet that he thinks he's killed him. So he leaves town. This is around when he's 18. He leaves town, he goes to Texas. He sets off across Texas, and according to his memoirs, he has several adventures, mostly doing odd jobs as a painter, carpenter, etc. He says he had luck with cards. He says in one Texas town, nobody famous, he got into an argument with a local gunfighter. And the next day, him and that gunfighter had decided to meet in true old West fashion, you know, with the draw on the streets. And that night, before the sun came up, his father showed up and told him that two important things. One, he hadn't killed that guy in Alabama and he could come back home. And two, he'd best clear out by dawn. And Oates was smart enough to do that, because Oates figured that guy would have killed him. He was no gunfighter. Now Oates comes back home, he starts teaching again, and then he starts studying law. And I think he's admitted to the bar in 1858, 1859. So he is a learned man, so to speak. More importantly, as far as his military career, he's a captain in the local militia. That'd be like the National Guard. And he knows basic drills. And so when those local boys go off to war, who do they elect as their official officer? Him. And by seniority and attrition, Oates, and of course wanting the job, Oates works himself up through the ranks until on this battlefield he's leading the entire regiment as a colonel, having started out as a captain. Now Oates is coming down through here, and he can hear the firing off through here, off to his left, my left. He can't see anything, but he knows that there's something happening. Now he desperately wanted to stay on Big Round Top. His men were tired, tuckered out, they obviously dehydrated, etc. But word came back to push ahead, push the attack. Hood wants to push the attack, the division commander. And so Oates roused his Alabamians, and they set off down this hill. Now he can hear the firing, he can see the smoke rising up over here, and he knows that the Yankees have to be close. But he's not exactly sure where they are. When he comes out, when you look down here, ladies and gentlemen, into this area, I want you to use your imagination to take away these cars, take away the road. What I want you to put back in with your imagination are the trees and the rocks. And those Alabamians are coming through there, and about the time they hit the road, or maybe on the opposite side of it, there's a blinding flash of light in this growing darkness in these woods. That blinding flash of light is what? Chamberlain's men firing those 300 muskets which illuminate the forest, and the bullets start zipping in here. You could hear the impact on the bodies. Most of them probably fired too high though, and you can hear them ricocheting off the trees and the rocks and so forth. Oates is going to back up the 15th Alabama, and as best he can in those dense woods, he is going to start to dress his lines. And once he gets his lines dressed, he is going to come out here, and he's going to put Tanner in front, and we're going to go right at him.
Huh. Really?
Hitting him straight ahead.
What?
All right, so Oates starts to hit this line. The Maine men redouble their firing. The Alabamians start to get behind these boulders. They talk about being behind these rocks down here. And so they reload from behind some of these boulders and they start shooting up here at Chamberlain's men. I can't tell you, welcome to Gettysburg, I can't tell you how many attacks were made by Oates that day. Combat, ladies and gentlemen, is a tunnel vision affair. All right, because if me and Tanner were standing here, face forward, if me and Tanner were standing here that day, what he perceives as an attack, I may not perceive as an attack. It may just be a crescendo in firing and an ebb to the firing. Is it, you know, it's kind of like a classroom if you remember the noise level to that. You know, it rises and falls right up here. So some people say, veterans say a lot of different number of attacks. But what is happening is there's continuous pressure being placed on Chamberlain's men. Now, what did the Texans do over here on the Union flank, the other Union flank? They moved left. Over here, Oates is going to move right because he can feel it. He can feel that the Union line has got, the end of it has got to be around here somewhere. So he's going to start sliding. Now, Chamberlain, let's be Yankees, face this way. Chamberlain is standing up here, his men, and they're firing like this down at the Alabamians into this area. As Chamberlain is focused on the threat that's in his immediate front, an officer comes to him, a messenger comes to him, and he says that the Confederates are trying to turn his flank. In other words, if we're the Federals, they're trying to get up here and cross the T on them. Hit them from this way. In this area. That's not going to give Chamberlain too much joy. But what are his orders?
Hold the ground.
Hold the ground at all hazards. So this is where Chamberlain starts to exert leadership on a grand scale. Chamberlain, we have two lines here, me and Tanner. He will tell Tanner in the first line to stay put. Keep firing in this direction. The second line will slide to the left and turn at right angles, like an L.
No, you stay straight.
You stay straight, Tanner. What are you doing?
Come on, Yank.
He's a good kid.
Thank you.
So Chamberlain turns his line like this, right? With the front being like that. Front being here, flank being over here. And that's where we're not going far, but we're going to about face and walk right over here to the left flank and continue the fighting. All right, so right over here, thank you, Tanner. Right over here is the flank marker for the 20th Maine. That's got an L on it. That means left flank. This is the end of the Union line. Then a few feet, but this is the end of the Union line on July 2nd. This is where Chamberlain bends back, facing this way. He bends back this way to face the Confederates. And he had only been here for a matter of time before Oates and those Alabamians start charging up this way too. It is an unenviable position for the Maine men because now they're caught in a crossfire because they're getting bullets from each direction as they're coming out through here. And the Alabamians are going to come rushing up through here and drive the Maine men back. I can't tell you how many times, but it's a seesaw battle that flows back and forth on top of this hill. So where you're standing and sitting today, literally, ladies and gentlemen, there was wounded and dead soldiers in this area. And more as the fighting continued to grow. There was pools of blood on these very rocks 151 years ago. It is a momentum, as I said, a momentum-driven battle where the rebels will drive the Yankees back and then the Yankees will drive the rebels back. and they'll keep repeating the process. But it's a stalemate, and Oates needs to break it. So he picks, we don't really know, maybe 20 or 30 men, and he detaches them to go around the end of the Union line and come in behind it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that attack will come in and cause some confusion. But back here where you see the gentleman in the blue shirt that has positioned himself so strategically right here, that is known as the Oates Rock. And that is reportedly where the flag bearer of the 15th Alabama and Oates' brother, not Oates himself, but Oates' brother, they are going to get to that rock right there. And later, many years after the battle, Oates is going to want to put up a monument to his men there because his brother is mortally wounded there. And of course, a lot of his men died in this area. Chamberlain will write him back and say, that's all fine and good, but you never got there. And so you see where the gentleman is, there is no monument. So, the battle seesaws back and forth. People are becoming fatigued. Soldiers are running out of ammunition. The main men are coming up and they are rifling the cartridge boxes of the dead and the wounded, trying to get everything they can. Chamberlain knows that his men are about out of gas. William C. Oates knows that his men are about out of gas. It's growing dark. Chamberlain and Oates don't know where they are. But Chamberlain has more friends closer than Oates does. Oates is the end of the Confederate line. People don't ever think about that. But he's the end of the line. He has no support off to his right. And he's starting to get bullets from over here, from his rear. And he doesn't know who that is, how many they are. So, here we get into, once again, Gettysburg and layers of history. William C. Oates is going to write and say, I decided to withdraw. Of course he would. And Chamberlain is going to write that I ordered an attack. Could both men be right? When they write? Right? So what ends up happening? Chamberlain is going to order a bayonet attack. And this is not even clear. Let's come up here, Tanner, and face toward the front again. The amazing Tanner. Remember, the lines are facing at right angles to each other. In Chamberlain's version of events, and like the movie portrays, Chamberlain is going to order bayonets. I don't know if they had dramatic music in the background as they did it or not. But Chamberlain is going to order bayonets, and he is going to order his left wing under Major Spears to pivot like a door. So they're going to roll out and pivot and swing like a door. You stay there and come flush with the right wing and then charge down the hillside.
Because these guys had already withdrawn or were withdrawn.
Chamberlain would say they weren't withdrawing, that he drove them off. So Oates would say he's withdrawing. Who knows? All right. So in Chamberlain's version of events, they're going to swing out here and make that bayonet attack. Remember one thing about Chamberlain. For better or worse, Chamberlain is a prolific writer. He is a good writer. If you want to read some good prose, go to the Visitor Center and buy one of his books. That man can write. He is vivid. I mean, you feel like you're there. But Chamberlain really put the glory back into war. Nothing wrong with that, but he remembered the heroism and the bravery of his men, seeing these scenes and so forth, and both sides fighting valiantly. His second in command, Major Spears, resents that after the war. Spears doesn't remember glory in war. Spears remembers pain and suffering and loss. And Spears resents Chamberlain trying to make something out of it. Spears writes, so take that into context, Spears remembers on July 2nd that he received no such order from Joshua Chamberlain. Where'd the right flank go? He received no such order from Chamberlain to swing his left flank in the line and dash down the hill. Spears writes, Spears writes that what happened was that the right flank, Tanner here, charged forward. And he saw the American flag go off in that direction, and Spears thought to himself, well, maybe we ought to do something. So he had the left wing advance too. Do you see how I'm saying the same thing though, but it's in a slightly different term? There's no dramatic pivot according to Spears. They basically both halves of this regiment charge close, almost simultaneous to each other. But it's not as dramatic as Chamberlain would have it. The bottom line is the bottom line though. Chamberlain, the 20th Maine, and those men drive back the Alabamians. He could have broken, the Maine men could have broken, and they were close to doing that on several times. They did not. The line was held, beyond a doubt. Chamberlain and his men held the line. And it is one of the most dramatic, it is one of the most courageous, and is one of the must-win, biggest must-win situations for the Union Army on July 2nd. You definitely don't want this area, a Confederate flag flying from Little Round Top. Because you know what those Southerners would do to this barbecue joint over here. They ransacked that thing real fast. That probably would cost them the victory, actually, because they just, oh, I know what to do, let me get some wood. Yes.
And on the 3rd, July 3rd, isn't, do you know a lot of the cannons from Little Round Top?
You're fine, thank you, Ted.
damage a lot of the troops marching on Pickett's charge?
Yes, a couple of them, but they're not going to cause the major damage. But you're correct, some of these guns did fire on Pickett's charge. Let me finish the story though before we get to July 3rd. You had a question?
Yeah, was Spears a professional soldier, a West Pointer?
I don't know.
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is perhaps the two accounts differ. You had a learned, educated, non-professional soldier who would glamorize and glorify what went on here, where the professional soldier wouldn't look at it. He'd look at it as what it was. It was a terrible, vicious.
I'm repeating it for the microphone. I know everybody heard you, but basically he's saying that you may have had a professional soldier under Spears and a how did you put Chamberlain?
You know, he's a dreamer.
He's a dreamer and so forth.
He glorifies
glorifies war. Beyond a doubt, sir.
That's why you're getting the two different takes on that.
Beyond a doubt, Chamberlain makes. I don't say he does it intentionally, but Chamberlain benefits from his war service.
I'm sure.
He becomes governor of Maine. In fact, William C. Oates is going to be governor of Alabama. I mean, we've got a president over here that lived in Gettysburg, that benefited greatly from military service. So I'm not criticizing Chamberlain for that. Chamberlain would come up, and I think Chamberlain, to a certain extent, Spears thought he over-exaggerated. And here we get into who's right and so forth. Maybe he's taken a little bit more of the lion's share. But you can't discount Spears' personal animosity. Apparently they didn't particularly get along or anything like that. It wouldn't be the first two men that never got along in history. So, but anyway, you know, the truth is probably in the middle out here with Chamberlain. The main thing is, though, once again, that Chamberlain is going to keep us cool. A lot of people would have broken, but Chamberlain's going to hold on to this for the best. Chamberlain is.
It's interesting that someone without the military background was willing and able to hold the ground as ordered, as opposed to, you know, a military man's going to do it. He's been trained from beginning to end, but a guy that didn't go through the ranks, you know, a military education, was willing and strong enough to do it.
Right. I think, but you're basically pointing out between professional military and non-professional. You also have the core of who you are. Some people can just take it. We all take stress very differently. You know, some people, well, you know yourselves better than obviously I do. I mean, you know how you react to stress. I mean, in certain situations I react pretty good, I think. In certain situations I don't. in this particular situation, Chamberlain did. The other thing about Chamberlain, though, is you could argue to push back, because I've been maybe a little too harsh on Chamberlain. To push back a little bit, Chamberlain earns his stars. The only reason he is a major general, ladies and gentlemen, promoted to major general, is they thought he was going to die. He received a ball at Petersburg a year later that went through both pelvises. And on the way through, it cut his urethra. And only because he was a major general, they did experimental surgery and spliced his urethra back together with a glass tube. And he would have complications that never healed. I think it leaked. You can imagine what that did to him. But it caused him a lot of pain and suffering for the rest of his life. And he would actually, some think, die of complications of that in the early 1900s, 1912, 1914, something like that. Yeah, but he was not supposed to be at Appomattox. I mean, they thought he's gone up the spout, as the soldiers would say. So definitely one thing, whether you agree or disagree with Joshua Chamberlain, nobody can call him a coward. I mean, he stood there after he was shot. I believe he had the American flag in his hand, if you want even more dramatic. And he leaned against, I think it was either his flag or his sword. It may have been his sword. I think maybe he stuck his sword in the ground, but he leaned against something and held himself up and urged his men on before he collapsed on the ground. It's crazy. I don't know if I could do that. I just don't know.
But you just did it.
Got that one on camera.
Yeah, I know I got that one, so I just did it. Okay, all right. Well, all right.
Don't undersell yourself.
Yeah, don't undersell myself. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Tanner, for the vote of confidence. I'm also skinny, too, so I could turn sideways, right? And all the bullets would miss me.
How big was Chamberlain? He looks like a bigger man.
That's because of his mustache.
His mustache.
His mustache out here. But you know, you get out into this area. I mean, Chamberlain, when he came back here, folks, the 20th Main Monument is right down there. All right, and then walk you down there. But Chamberlain, when he came back here for the monument dedication, they put the monument there because that is where they said the two wings tied together. Chamberlain got back here whenever it was 20, 30 years after the war, and he said, I don't remember this. I don't remember the flag being here. And they said, well, this is where it was, and so that's where the monument is. So, in memory of men. Now, to close it off, let me say something to tie it all in. Don't walk out of here getting the impression that I am dismissing Joshua Chamberlain's actions. I'm just trying to put it in realistic terms for you. And don't think I'm dismissing what Chamberlain pulled off on the left flank. The one thing, though, that I want you to be aware of, and I think is overshadowed by the movie, is that Chamberlain's action here is one of a series of events that occur on July 2nd. It is not the single event that occurs that day that saves the Union Army. It is a number of events. I could point to you a lot of different things. The 137th New York on Culp's Hill, the 1st Minnesota at the Pennsylvania Monument, close to there, charging there. 80% casualties for the Minnesota men. There are a lot of heroism on this field that eventually is going to lead to Union victory. The Confederates, Robert E. Lee, are going to hurl everything they've got at George Meade, or everything Lee can get into the battle that day. And they are going to come this close from winning it. Little Round Top captures the imagination of the American public still today, because just like Pickett's charge, it's one of these great what ifs. What could have happened up here? And it is always a privilege, and I hope it is an honor for you also, to come out here and walk on the same ground and in the same footsteps of these brave men. Thank y'all very much.